And now we can hear from Team StyleCheck, which is a collaborative effort between AFP and the Irish Examiner. And they have developed an AI-based tool to help journalists stick to in-house style guides. So joining us today to talk about their project is Nathalie, Claire, and James. Nathalie and James are from AFP, and Claire is from the Irish Examiner. I think James will be joining for the Q&A session, but Claire and Nathalie, you will be, yes, he's here right now. Hi, James, and you will be taking the presentation, so I hand it over to you now.
Hello, welcome again. So what is StyleCheck? We will let our colleague and teammate, James Pheby from AFP's bureau in London, show us in this video demonstration. Please make sure your volume is turned up.
Hopefully that illustrates the problem that StyleCheck is designed to solve, and how it fits into the workflow. We'll expand upon that by looking a little more at the interface and how the app performs with different types of rules, using real articles that have had style errors inserted. The app will ideally be integrated into the editorial platform and run with a single click, but at the moment it is a standalone web app. To run a query, you log in, then add the article's dateline, headline and text, and click the StyleCheck button. In reality, it takes around 15 seconds to return the results, but in the meantime, the journalist can perform a manual final check as normal. This article is about COP climate negotiations and returns 4 potential errors. For each potential error, the app returns the problematic chunk of text, the title and description of the rule that may have been breached, a suggested alternative, and an explanation of the error. Focusing on the final 2 errors, the app has correctly flagged the misuse of the word continued in the lead and suggested a snappier alternative. It then shows its ability to evaluate more complex rules by highlighting a passive sentence structure and suggesting a more active phrasing. In the second story, again dealing with the Gulf, we can see how it catches potential style rules targeted at the headline and suggests the proper way of shortening it by abbreviating South Korea. The final example regards an article on the challenges faced by people with disabilities when visiting the Paris Olympics, and flags up 2 instances of outdated language that should be replaced. Here we also see the app returns a general advisory note on how to deal with French names throughout an article. These notes are explained a little more in the challenges and solutions section, which we'll now move on to.
Hi there. So we started our project by analysing our guidelines to determine our approach. So a typical style guide is formatted something like in this example, where you've got a rule description, a name, a correct usage and incorrect usage. So we first checked whether fine-tuning a large language model was feasible at all. it would basically require us to create and label millions of incorrect and correct examples of usage, like this one, for example. So it quickly became clear the workload for this was way too onerous to be viable. So we changed tack to a much simpler method, just putting all the rules in one big prompt. And we put the article text, the prompt instruction, and the whole guidebook into the same prompt. Basically, it's asking, does this article comply with these guidelines? And then send it to generative AI model. And then that checks whether the article is compliant with the rules or not. And we were getting a reasonable amount of accurate responses on our small sample size. So of the OpenAI suite of models, the most recent and advanced ones gave the most accurate results. And we settled on using GPT-4o Mini. Testing also revealed that keeping the temperature of the model firmly at 0 ensured reasonable precision of the results. It reduced some of the more creative responses AI can give, and it also delivered a decent standardized output in JSON. But there were serious considerations. The prompt was taking too long to run, which is a key consideration in a fast-moving newsroom. So we found that the more guidelines in the prompt, the higher the cost in terms of AI tokens. The more rules we put into the prompt, the more the model tended to pick rules just from the beginning. And the longer the prompt, the more inaccuracies crept in. So we wanted to reduce the number of rules we ran on each article. So we started testing how many rules would be optimal. And we ran a series of speed and cost tests and found a sweet spot where we could still check a sizable number of rules, say 20. For example, this is just one of many tests. For checking a 515-word article against 20 rules, it cost $0.0095 and took 5 seconds to run. But these results were very variable. Some of the speeds were very variable, but it did give some quite promising results. So to deliver the reduced number of rules, we started exploring the relatively new technology of retrieval augmented generation, i.e. RAG. So with RAG, we were not going to put the whole style guide into the prompt, but instead feed in just a subset of rules, the rules that are relevant to that particular article. So we would be bypassing any of the costly and time-consuming training of a model. And it was going to be much more of a targeted approach, only focusing on the guidelines relevant to the article in question. And it would hopefully solve several issues. Firstly, the style guide can be stored separately as a spreadsheet, so there are none of the data protection issues associated with fine-tuning the model. Secondly, our rules can be updated outside of the application architecture, making them ready for use within seconds. Thirdly, it means the app will theoretically adapt immediately to any style guide if it is correctly formatted. Simply plugging a different it's similar to plugging a different computer game into a console. So finally, it's a relatively trivial task to switch in new versions of the LLM as the technology inevitably gets better in the future. So what methods would we use to retrieve this subset of rules? We looked briefly at using regex and named entities, but they could only catch a limited number of rules. Also, it required quite a bit of maintenance by a computer programmer. We needed different techniques because style guides encompass a variety of rules, from the extremely broad, such as avoiding discriminatory language, to the very particular, such as whether to put a hyphen in the phrase black box. So with the particular rules, these could be simply caught with a key string search on the article. Not an AI solution at all, but simple, did the job. So just basically look for the exact words, black box. If it's found in the article, this is deemed one of the subset of rules. And so there were, however, for the guidelines that don't have predictable keywords to search for, like the discriminatory language one, we used a semantic search. So in this diagram, as in number 1, we first run every guideline through an embedding model to get its semantic vector and store it in a database. We use Pinecone. Then in 2, when StyleCheck runs, we pass the article through the same embedding model used for the guidelines, just to get its semantic vector. So now we have the 2 sets of the vectors, one for the guidelines, one for the article. Pinecone compares vectors, and if they are similar, then the rules will be semantically similar, and the guidelines are deemed relevant. So having got the most relevant guidelines for the particular article, we can now run our original prompt, which is now essentially asking, is this article compliant with this subset of guidelines, not all of the guidelines? So now over to Nathalie Samaha to tell us more about the prompt text.
Thank you, Claire. For a prompt, as we all know, for a prompt to be effective, it needs to have clear requirements in the proper order, as we can see in this example. We have a clear role definition. So the role of the AI is established as editor-in-chief. It's well defined and providing context. An explicit input structure. The text input is broken down into dateline, headline, and lead, making it clear what to evaluate. We also use the notation system. The use of delimiters provides a structured way to distinguish main rules and context. We also have a specific compliance focus. We instruct the AI to assess only against main rules. This way we reduce ambiguity. And finally, a detailed output for the requirements. The JSON structure is explicitly defined with keys like is article compliant with all rules and explanations for each field. Performance. While the app performed well, catching errors relating to 75% of the rules in the AFP style guide, it does run into recurring problems on both the general and the particular scale. On the general scale, anyone who has used large language models will be aware of hallucinations, and StyleCheck is no different. The tool can return non-existent errors, such as the example above, where it suggests we have the name of the Iranian president wrong when it is in fact correct. The main way we mitigated this was by rephrasing the guidelines to make them more precise. But there is always going to be a trade-off between making sure you catch any big mistakes and getting false positives. We feel that the consequences of missing a serious error are much worse than those of returning false suggestions. It is important to trust the process and make sure journalists understand that as generative AI models improve, so will the results, much like the improvement of translation apps in recent years. More on performance, another issue to affect all rule types is returning the correct suggestion but citing the wrong rule. As can be seen in this example, it correctly identifies that 3 should be written out, but cites the abbreviations rule rather than the numbers rule. It does not impact the overall ability to catch and correct errors and should also become less of a problem as generative AI improves. A final problem familiar to large language model users is inconsistency in results, receiving different responses despite providing an identical input. With StyleCheck, this manifests itself in the app returning different errors on the same article if run twice. The concern here is that it can miss errors on one run and catch them on the next. In this example, the first run does not catch the misuse of the word won't, whereas the second run does. Compliance checks. On the more particular scale, the biggest issue was with rules that required a knowledge of a term's position in the article. For example, if United Nations appears as first or second reference, as our styled guide tells us, it never needs to be written out in full, unless it is a long story. Other rules that pose a problem were those that require background knowledge, such as brand names, movie titles. This is something that could potentially be improved by giving the tool access to named entity information if it is available in the editorial platform. Subjective and intricate rules, such as the one dealing with how French names are treated at various points in an article, also caused an issue. The current solution is to return the rule in full whenever the keyword such as France is mentioned. On testing, while testing the tool, we also face some difficulties. Testing every variable in isolation is very human resource heavy, and there are many variables. They include the model type, the guidelines format, and the prompt text. In addition, there are modal variables such as temperature and scores, and of course, the type of article used. The problem is compounded by getting inconsistent results from the model each time you run it. This makes it extremely difficult and time-consuming to establish a mathematical baseline to measure performance. We have on the impact and next steps a few words from AFP and the Irish Examiner on their expectations of the app. For next steps, the first move would be to establish a more formal testing regime, which would help tune the variables and refine the process. This is a tool that would work best if integrated in an editorial platform to ensure a more efficient workflow. Developing for other languages shouldn't be difficult, considering the linguistic capacities of large language models. In the long term, this tool could be adapted to include spell and fact-checking to make it a comprehensive editing tool for journalists. So, in conclusion, and to answer the question on everyone's mind, do we recommend this tool? Yes. As newsrooms face increasing demands for speed, accuracy, and consistency, investing in RAG-based tools for editorial assistance will undoubtedly become a strategic necessity. AI-powered agents are the future of these tools, offering potential not just for improving style guide compliance, but also enhancing every aspect of journalistic production, from ideation to publishing. Thank you for joining us.
Well done, team. That was an amazing presentation, and thank you for taking the time to go through it. We have about 3 minutes for questions, but let's try and get to as many as we can. I'm going to go with the first question from David, which is, how can I find out more about how the project was developed? I think outside of this presentation. And did you write a research paper, or is there a report I can access?
Oh, perhaps I just answer that not yet, but we have some code prepared, put into GitHub, which has a playground basically, so you can put in your own guidelines and just try it out for yourselves. And that also has quite a lot of documentation in relation to walking you through some of the things we've said in this presentation.
Super, thanks, Claire. Duncan is asking, have you compared the cost quality to any third-party tools on the market, example, Grammarly's style guide feature?
No, not in terms of cost. No, but basically Grammarly wouldn't do the job we were looking for. So basically we might even use Grammarly for some basic grammar checks. This is beyond, it's always going to be a newsroom specific set of rules. So it wasn't more relevant. Yeah. It's something that we need we need a custom built thing just to make it work.
Nathalie, do you want to add to that?
No, it's different tools. This one was specific for, it needs to work on the style guides of a newsroom. So we didn't want to compare. We wanted to start from our, each of our newsrooms, style guides, and work from there.
Super. I'm going to take Cherry's question. How many times did the team test the prompt until identifying the best one? How do you evaluate the output and pick the best prompt?
Okay, I will answer this one. Actually, the work on the prompt wasn't as hard as I anticipated at the beginning. Large language models have evolved, a lot since I started working and doing prompt engineering, and the results were visible as soon as I knew that I needed to have certain requirements there, and they needed to be in a certain order, so the execution is flowing seamlessly. And it was just a matter of making sure that all the elements were in the prompt, and the results were just, apart from the issues that we mentioned about the hallucinations and the other things, but the prompt itself was as effective as we could get it. But there is always room for improvement, for sure.
Super. Last question. I think it's from Pheby, who is also a fellow. Did I understand correctly that the tool spotted 75% of the errors existing in the test articles?
Yeah, I can take that. So yes, it had the capability to pick up 75% of the rules that were in our style guide. The only caveat to that is that it doesn't necessarily pick them up every time. It can sometimes not pick them up on one run, and you could change some text elsewhere in the piece, and then the next run it would pick up that. So that, I mean, that is just something we've got to trust the process with and accept that it'll get better as the models improve.
And can I just add to that in order to sort of adjust some of those results, we did tinker around with basically adjusting these scores in Pinecone. So, for example, if it was as it got lower, it would pick up fewer rolls, and if we set it up higher, it would pick up too many rolls. And then running the prompt itself, we were setting it to the temperature to 0. Did tinker around a bit with the prompt, so there were a lot of variables that we were testing, and had to test them in a human way.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, James. I'm just going to take one more question. I know there are a lot of them that are coming in now. I'll take the one from Marcos, which asks, what happens if a hallucination leads to a very big journalistic error? For example, increasing the number of victims in an event. I'm not sure if this applies, but if you have an answer to this, please do.
I mean, it's still going to be up to the journalist to double check whether the error is really an error. So if it hallucinates that it's a wrong, that it's mistaken a toll in a disaster, then the journalist is going to look again at the primary source that they used for the story in the first place.
Great work, team. Again, it's been a pleasure working with all of you.